First of all, we would like to thank the organizers for giving the opportunity to present some results of the two French-German research projects, West Hallstatt Gold and Celtic Gold, supported by the Agence nationale de la recherche and the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft. The aim is to present an overview of what is known about the precious metal finds of the early Iron Age from the point of view of the question of the mobility of elites and their contacts with the Mediterranean. In other words, to what extent are these precious artifact indicators of exchanges, contacts, and mobility, and which are the regions of the South in relation to the North from this point of view? We will focus on the central and western Hallstattkreis and will incorporate Latin A because it is well known that the elite burials don't stop with the Hallstatt D3. It is important to underline that some works on the early Iron Age still insist today on the idea that certain Mediterranean societies played a decisive role in the emergence, development, and collapse of the Hallstatt princely phenomenon. Some authors have even postulated the extension to all Europe of a world economy system focused on the Greek world and Etruscan Italy. This way of viewing the early Iron Age in temperate Western Europe brings to mind the famous Formula X Oriente Lux. In the field of goldsmithing, many have insisted on the influences coming from Greece or from regions in close contact with the Greek colonies, such as the southwestern steppe. Christian Heller has insisted also on the strong connections with Italy and the Etruscans. But little attention has been paid to other possible Mediterranean connections. The possibility of a local development of Hallstatt goldsmithing has been also little exploited until now. To give just one example, let us recall that the Vix cup, made of silver and with a golden umbilicus, was for a long time assumed to be an import coming from Greece or from a region in close contact with Greece. It is true that the use of silver is unusual in the Hallstatt domain. Nevertheless, the Vix cup, with its plain form, has no parallel in the Mediterranean. In fact, the best comparisons are found in France, among local fine ceramics productions, some of which dating back to the Hallstatt Sea, as De Krause has already noted. Although original in terms of the metal used, the silver vase from Vix is not a Mediterranean fial, but a precious metal cup in the Hallstatt tradition. We shall see that it's not an isolated example. We will discuss the topic along four research directions: functional categories of the precious objects, style and decorative patterns, metals and techniques. In each case, we will asking what is part of local traditions rooted in the late Bronze Age and what appears to be new. Among these novelties, we will ask which can be attributed to relationships with the South and, in this case, with which regions of the Mediterranean. Concerning the functional categories, the objects belonging to a local tradition are torques, bracelets, anklets, beads, pins, cups, and probably drinking horns. As we have just seen with the example of Vix, the Hallstattian precious metal cups seem to have little or no Mediterranean influence. On the other hand, there is a type of small vessels that were unknown before the Hallstatt D, the strainers with handle and for individual use. In the late Bronze Age, the strainers were larger and without handle and had a different function. These very rare small strainers, known from the Oeneburg, Lavaux, and Klein-Aspergle, seem to be inspired by Mediterranean productions, but without any precise models being identified. Other precious artifacts that were unknown before the Hallstatt D are fibulae, earrings, and finger rings. The gold fibula are local productions, but the earliest one, which date from the Hallstatt D1, are copies of models from northern Italy, especially from the Gola Secca culture. The first bronze Hallstatt fibulae show the same influences at this time. At the same time appear the earrings. These earrings have a characteristic crescent shape. They are big at the beginning and become smaller with time. In the 6th century BC, the earrings of the Greek and Etruscan worlds are quite different. The best comparisons then are found in the Phoenician world and the regions in close contact with the Phoenicians, especially in the Iberian Peninsula. To sum up, Hallstattian fibulae and earrings reflects, therefore, a certain eclecticism in influences and contact system around 600 BC. Finger rings appeared about a century later with Latin R. They correspond to the adoption of a new mode of recognition of the elites to the detriment of the traditional emblems such like neck rings. These finger rings do not have comparison in the Iberian Peninsula, but they are well known in the male elite burials of central Italy. Once again, the stylistic and manufacturing details show that the finger rings found north of the Alps are local productions, but of Italian inspiration, probably Etruscan. Let us now have a look at the precious metal objects from the point of view of style and decorative patterns. More of the Hallstattian motifs are traditional. They are rooted in the geometric style of the Bronze Age and are formed by the linear or concentric repetition of circles, dots, squares, lozenges, triangles, etc. These motifs can be printed in low relief in gold. However, an original style was developed in parallel at the beginning of the Hallstatt D. This is well illustrated by the earrings in the female graves of Betelbull and St. Colombe. These large earrings, possibly made in a safe workshop, why not in the Heuneberg, are decorated in high relief with repeated umbilical caps and beakers. These plastic decorations are well known in the Iberian Peninsula from the late Bronze Age, as Wilhelm Schöler observed in the 60s. Here we can see some comparison from Portugal and Spain, from Sintra, El Carambolo, and Fortanete. This Iberian style, also made up of alternating very marked reliefs, seems to have inspired some Hallstatt ring ornaments with corrugated relief. This new geometric plastic style is already known from Hallstatt D1, for example, in the earliest grave at Kappel am Rhein. It then spread widely in the production of cloaks and bracelets in Hallstatt D2. The arm ring from Ohrdorf, as before, the one from Kappel am Rhein, is a good example of the diffusion of this geometric plastic style. Later in Hallstatt D3, the Wigstork still underlines an inspiration coming from the west of the Iberian Peninsula in its form and its decoration. In this case, comparisons are beyond the Western Mediterranean. In addition to the design and style, new patterns from Hallstatt D1 also show contributions from the south. This is the case with the beaded motif, which imitates the appearance of beaded wire from Hallstatt D2 onwards, and curiously, true beaded wires are only well known for the moment from Hallstatt D3. Meanders appear even earlier, from the beginning of Hallstatt D with the Jägenstorf pendant and some Betelbull artifacts. They do not become more frequent only until Hallstatt D3. Other Mediterranean patterns seem to be introduced later in Hallstatt D3. We can mention the arches or tongue motifs of the Wigstork, which are then found at Latin A1 in Lavaux and Uetliberg. This is also the case for the continuous friezes formed by waves and interlocking arches that decorate some fibula springs. Some of these patterns and their arrangements implies the use of the compass, which will be further developed during Latin A. Figurative motifs are also a novelty in a Western Hallstatt art dominated by geometric abstraction, but they are only known from Hallstatt D2. Human head, repeated like a mask, appear in Hallstatt D2 on a talk from Eastern France. Human heads become frequent at Latin A. They are sometimes realistic, such as Verschweiler, sometimes grotesque, as on the Rodenbach armory. Human heads are very frequent throughout the Mediterranean and don't reflect a connection with one region rather than another. But it has already been noted that the double mask on the Rodenbach fingering can be compared to the satyr heads in heraldic position on some Etruscan fingerings. Floral motifs from Near Eastern art appear even later. The lotus flower is only known from the end of Hallstatt D3 on the rings. From Unterlunghofen, the palmette is known from Latin A1, especially in the Lavaux grave. They are due to the influence of the Etruscan orientalizing style. Animals and fantastic creatures, especially winged creatures, are also attested in Hallstatt D2, such as the Pegasus on the Hordorf talk. Mediterranean models are reproduced very faithfully in Hallstatt D3 on the Wixtork and in Latin A1 on the Weiskirchen drinking horn. But for all of these orientalizing patterns, we can observe very quickly during Latin A phenomenon of appropriation by Celtic craftsmen. These motifs were translated and transformed in an original style, especially with the help of a compass. The early appearance of all these Mediterranean motifs, sometimes as early as Hallstatt D1, but especially in Hallstatt D2 and D3, corresponds to the emergence of a new style, sometimes described as Proto-Latin. This Proto-Latin name is problematic, but it's very suggestive. Now let's have a look on the metal used by goldsmiths. During the Bronze Age and the early Iron Age, native gold from alluvial deposits was mainly used. Native gold is naturally alloyed with silver that can attain up to 50% and a low copper content below 3%. To a small extent, almost pure gold with more than 96% gold was available to Celtic goldsmiths already from Hallstatt D3. Pure gold is represented by some artifacts coming from Ensisheim, Cerilly, Mersey, and the Glauberg. The annular gold ornaments from the Lavaux grave also belong to this group. Perhaps it's also the same, perhaps, for the Torque of Vix. We can't decide whether this pure gold comes from some native gold deposits, which are particularly rich in gold, or is it made of artificial purified gold? If this almost pure gold was purified, is it a matter of locally processed gold or an imported gold? This question is still open. Furthermore, from Hallstatt D1, gold is no longer the only precious metal. Silver objects appear in elite graves, probably as a Mediterranean influence. Silver is often combined with gold, such as the pendants with silver rings from the Betel Bull or the silver fibulae from Gurgy with gold filigrees and gilded drum. Other productions also imply gilding by diffusion bonding on silver, like example from Herbertingen und Dörsingen, Vix, Unterlunghofen. The Latin A grave from Lavaux holds actually the largest assemblage of silver artifacts, including partially gilded objects. Concerning now the techniques, we could underline that most of the technical knowledge of the Hallstattian goldsmiths was already achieved in the late Bronze Age. That is, head-involving techniques comprise casting as well as joining techniques like soldering with the head of a lower melting gold alloy. Plastic shaping is represented by sheet and wire production, also by mechanical joining like riveting and decoration techniques, including chasing and punching, the use of dies, as well as mechanical gilding by sheet plating. Punch decoration on Hallstatt D and Latin A gold work that reveals foreign patterns is sometimes combined with local design. In Latin A, a new feature is open work, which is created with a bronze sheet support covered by thin gold sheet. The use of lace was developed in late Bronze Age Iberia for the elaboration of shapes and decoration of wax models, cylindrical or disc shaped, which were then cast in the lost wax technique. Early Iron Age artisans used the lace for wax models, but also as spinning lace for pushing thin gold sheet over a wooden chuck with stone profile. Eminent examples are the Hallstatt D neck and arm rings made of sheet with a corrugated profile. An example of the use of rotary motion for wax models are the two discs from the Vic stork, with concentric design and the truncated cone of the terminals. The disc refers to Atlantic late Bronze Age predecessors. Soldered ornaments bearing new shapes and potential Mediterranean influences attest solely metallic solder made by adding gold alloy with added copper for lowering the melting point. None of the examined gold artifacts showed copper solder, a technique mastered by the Etruscan goldsmiths since the 7th century BC. But two probable Etruscan imports are known from Switzerland, the two examples of the granulated beads from Inns and Jegensdorf suggest visually this hypothesis. Nevertheless, at Inns, solder alloy droplets on chain links at the associated loop-in-loop chain demonstrate clearly the use of traditional metallic solder on this part of the necklace. We said that solder is known since the Bronze Age. However, changes in early Iron Age gold working appear with two decorative techniques using solder. Granulation and filigree were adopted from the Mediterranean world. However, these novelties did not lead to the adoption of a new soldering technique coming from the south. For granulation, for example, artifacts from Ensisheim, Wormsensheim, and Bourges-Lasnais are soldered with adding metallic solder alloy, as shown the dendritic structure on the joining materials. We must also notice that the granules of these objects are always much bigger than the very tiny granules visible on Etruscan jewels. For filigrees, decorative wire elements are bent in shape with pliers and with the head of a jig and fixed by soldering. One of the early Iron Age sophisticated local filigree appears on the Vic stork. Two types of wire, plain rolled and beaded, were formed to meandering bands and fixed on a gold plate by soldering. The fingering from the female princely grave of Rheinheim shows another application of meandering filigree. Twisted wires are soldered between plain wire rings to create an open-work cylinder. The Hallstatt C2 D1 pendant from Jegensdorf is the only filigree object with most likely worked with the Etruscan copper salt solder and seems to be an italic import. It is decorated with meandering filigree with twisted wire. Figurative elements on ornaments, which are new, were executed in the traditional lost wars technique, while most of the bracelets and torques are hollow cast, realized using a casting core. The Lavo torque makes an exception. It is made exclusively from solid cast elements joined by metallic solder. Diffusion gilding on silver is often used for polychrome work. Thin gold sheet is placed on the surface of a silver object, slightly heated up and burnished. This causes a strong bond in the contact zone, shown by the diffusion areas of metallographic sections and visible by the X-ray cartography. Gilding silver by diffusion bonding is coming up in Hallstatt D3, as showed the example of the Vix cup omphalos and the Gurgi fibula. Rivets with gilded silver head belonging to a furniture fitting from the Grafenbühl grave are probably imported from the Mediterranean. Gilding is also very rare during Latin art. To sum up, most technical knowledge of the Hallstatt period was already developed in the late Bronze Age, including casting, plastic shaping, and soldering techniques. What is changing is not so much the techniques, but rather their application for new stylistic forms of expression. The ancient know-how was applied to new styles with a preference for sheet work. Some novelties, such like granulation, filigree, and gilding by diffusion bonding, are developed, but on a very few number of objects. In early Latin, the same fine metalworking technologies continue. They are applied to a changing style called early Celtic art. Complexity and 3D shapes develop along with bimetallic items using open work. As a conclusion, with regards to the topic of this paper, notably the role of precious metal finds in Hallstatt and Latin A burial as indicators of context and exchange, we can state that gold imports from the Mediterranean are almost non-existent, unlike the situation for imported luxury items in bronze, ceramics, or exotic materials found in early Iron Age elites' graves, and which draw a completely different picture. Nevertheless, as highlighted in this presentation, some new functional categories of objects, innovative stylistic features of shapes and decoration, the use of silver or pure gold, as also certain novel technical aspects show indirectly contacts with the South. But these novelties are usually combined or hybridized with traditional style and techniques. The input and influences from the South are more complex and multilateral than assumed traditionally, by means of at least two strong sequences, which are probably not the only ones. First, during the first half 6th century BC, strong influences from Iberia, but not only, are in evidence, given that the Iberian Peninsula itself was a melting pot between the Atlantic Bronze Age traditions and Phoenicians. Contacts between temperate Western Europe and the Western Mediterranean are not new, as we could see with the Iberian Late Bronze Age gold bowl found in Zurich, Hallstatt. And secondly, during the 5th century BC, influences from central Italy and the Etruscan world were predominant. Certainly, other influences and contacts, direct or not, attesting mobilities of people, objects, and ideas need to be defined, to be better defined, such as from the Achaemenic world, the Eurasian steppes, and Balkan domain. Thank you for your attention.